facing the vast sea, a field of creation and spiritual hut, silence swallowing life's acts into the deep, of thought transcendent climb and heavenward leap, a brooding world of reverie and thought, filled with the mightiest works of God and man, where nature seemed a dream of the divine, and beauty and grace and grandeur had their home. Harbored the childhood of the incarnate flame.
Good morning. We're reading in Book 4, the Book of Birth and Quest. After Aswapati's inner journey in which he ascends all the planes of consciousness to the feet of the Divine Mother at the threshold of the supermind, and implores her to incarnate on earth. And she agrees. She says, "O strong forerunner, I have heard thy cry. One shall descend and break the iron law, change nature's doom by the lone spirit's power." So that comes at the end of Book 3, the Book of the Divine Mother. And then we've read already through Canto 1, the birth and childhood of the flame. So after the Divine Mother agrees to descend, Sri Aurobindo takes us through 6 seasons of the Indian climate, describing them in detail. And then in the spring, Savitri is born. And he describes her infancy in that canto. And now in Canto 2, he is describing her growth into a young woman. So we've come to page 360 at line 47. And here, Sri Aurobindo is describing Savitri's growth through childhood and learning at the feet of sages at the palace where she lives. But also now he is describing the culture, the Indian ancient Vedic culture in which she is being brought up, and Sri Aurobindo is describing that culture to us. So let's begin with B. You could start at line 47.
The invested,
Yes.
Invested with a rhythm of higher spheres, the word was used as a hieratic means for the release of the imprisoned spirit into communion with its comrade gods, or it helped to beat out new expressive forms of that which labors in the heart of life. Some immemorial soul in men and things, seeker of the unknown and the unborn, carrying a light from the ineffable to rend the veil of the last mysteries. Intense philosophies pointed earth to heaven, or on foundations broad as cosmic space, upraised the earth mind to superhuman heights. overpassing lines that please the outward eyes, but hide the sight of that which lives within. Sculpture and painting, concentrated sense upon the inner vision's motionless verge, revealed a figure of the invisible, unveiled all nature's meanings in a form, or caught into a body the divine.
Thank you. In describing this Vedic culture in which he is being brought up, he begins here with the word. And we know that in the ancient Vedic times, there were these sacrifices that were performed in which the sages repeated these mantric words and lines, invoking the gods into themselves, into those around. So he seems to refer to this. We see in Sri Aurobindo's works like the Hymns to the Mystic Fire or The Secret of the Vedas, how he has translated and interpreted many of these hymns and verses of the Vedic times, indicated the significances of these different gods that the rishis were invoking. And then he speaks of the intense philosophies which pointed earth to heaven, or on foundations broad as cosmic space, upraise the earth mind to superhuman heights. And here we think of the Upanishads, which followed the early Vedic hymns, systematized the thought into philosophies, into a more structured understanding of existence and of human life and its relation with the gods and with the divine. And then Sri Aurobindo speaks of other aspects of the culture of the time, sculpture and painting, which concentrated sense upon an inner vision's motionless verge. he suggests that they became expressions in outward forms that we can sense, see, and touch of inner truths that were experienced within the artist, within their inner and higher consciousness. They revealed a figure of the invisible, unveiled all nature's meaning in a form, or caught into a body, the divine. We can think of these sculptures of the divinities, of the gods and goddesses, which revealed in their forms something of the consciousness, the vibrations of these deities. And Sri Aurobindo will continue with other aspects of the culture. And we can continue.
Discovered here its inward musing shapes.
Excuse
No?
me, I think we're at
Sorry?
the architecture of the infinite, the last line on 360.
Okay, so yeah. The architecture of the infinite. Discovered here its inward musing shapes, captured into wide breadths of soaring stone. Music brought down celestial yearnings, song, held the merged heart absorbed in rapturous depths, linking the human with the cosmic cry, the world interpreting movements of the dance, molded idea and mood to a rhythmic sway, and posture, crafts minute in subtle lines, eternized a swift moment's memory, or showed in a carving's sweep, a cup's design, the underlying patterns of the unseen. Poems in largeness cast like moving worlds, and meters surging with the ocean's voice, translated by grandeurs locked in nature's heart, but thrown now into a crowded glory of speech, the beauty and sublimity of her forms, the passion of her moments and her moods, lifting the human word nearer to God's.
Thank you. Let's pause there. Sri Aurobindo gives us actually a very deep interpretation of art and culture here. So he links all of these different forms of disciplined expression to the divine, that they are outflows and expressions of the inner divinity, of the deeper consciousness, of the deeper significances that underlie human life. He has described this kind of philosophy of culture in great detail in the book that used to be called The Foundations of Indian Culture. Now I think it's part of the Renaissance in India. And he describes all these different art forms or cultural forms like architecture, literature, painting, and their significance is that they had in the early Vedic culture especially, but also which underlies them also in general. I don't know that any other philosopher has given this kind of deeper spiritual significance to all of these things. Usually in the West in particular, but perhaps in other places also, there's these forms take a more superficial form of expression of thoughts or ideas or vital movements. Music can be an expression of a kind of a lower vital vibration, or it can be an expression of a sublime vibration reaching up towards the divine. So he's giving us this higher interpretation and possibility of art and culture. And he spends a few more lines describing poetry here, Sri Aurobindo's particular field of expertise, and perhaps nicely describes Savitri. Poems in largeness, cast like moving worlds, and meters surging with the ocean's voice, translated by grandeurs locked in nature's heart, but thrown now into a crowded glory of speech, the beauty and sublimity of her forms, the passion of her moments and her moods, lifting the human word nearer to the gods. So we continue, Nitya. Man's eyes could look.
Man's eyes could look into the inner realms. His scrutiny discovered numbers' law and organized the motions of the stars, mapped out the visible fashioning of the world, questioned the process of his thoughts, or made a theorized diagram of mind and life. These things she took in as her nature's food, but these alone could fill not her wide self. A human seeking limited by its gains, to her they seemed the great and early steps, hazardous of a young discovering spirit, which saw not yet by its own native light. It tapped the universe with testing knocks, or stretched to find truth mind's divining rod. There was a growing out to numberless sides, but not the widest seeing of the soul, not yet the vast direct immediate touch, nor yet the art and wisdom of the gods.
Thank you. Here, Sri Aurobindo seems to speak of numerology and astrology as symbolic forms expressing inner truths and mapping out the visible fashioning of the world. So they are kind of translations of the inner truths that are being expressed in the world, but according to these symbolic forms, or these symbolic forms represent that translation of the inner truths to the outer physical realities. The numbers of our birth, significant numbers in our life, dates, and so forth. And the motions of the stars, the motions of the planets and against the stars, representing in a symbolic way the development and outflowering of our life. And then he speaks of the process of the thoughts. This suggests a kind of a psychology, which is perhaps also there in the early scriptures, a theorized diagram of mind and life. So Savitri is taking in all of this culture, is learning from it, is discovering herself and her world through these things, but still she is not satisfied with what they present to her. They could not fill her wide self. To her, they seemed the great and early steps, hazardous of a young, discovering spirit, which saw not yet by its own native light. It's not a direct seeing of the inner realities, but a kind of representation of them through these symbolic forms, whether of numbers or the stars or architecture or crafts or words. She says it tapped the universe with testing knocks. Sometimes we might tap something to see how firm it is or how solid. So these things are kind of testing the truths of things, but not quite revealing them in their utter truth. It's like he compares to find that they were finding truth like mind's divining rod, like the rod that diviners use to seek for water or precious metals under the ground with a forked stick. So they're exploring and tapping the earth and feeling for the truths that underlie things. For her, this was a growing out to numberless sides, but not the widest seeing of the soul. Not yet the vast, direct, immediate touch, nor yet the art and wisdom of the gods. So we'll continue.
Maybe to this aspect, there's also told by Lopa that, or written by the mother somewhere, that when she, as a child, reading about history written by human beings, she said that's not true. She saw the truth then immediately and told her brother, it's not so true what they write. And then later discovered the others could not see as she is seeing. So
she had this, as a child, she had this more direct touch with the realities of the past.
Yeah, also of the truth in books, what is written. Yeah.
Right, and which were distorted in some way in the histories. She could see the deeper truths that were there behind.
Richard Pearson's reminiscence of some book. It's Remembering the Mother with Gratitude. I read long back, and he says when they were doing the December 1st cultural program, they had to show something about evolution on Earth and present that to Mother. And she saw the whole thing and she said, evolution is nothing like this of what they're showing. And she said, she commented that the birds were created by the angels and the insect kingdom was created by the asuras. And suddenly he said, I didn't have any need for the science what I was learning.
Yeah.
It's like the knowledge by identity, the highest form of knowledge we have ever talked about, pure intuition. So from a child, she could see the picture through the pure intuition.
Yeah.
Even before she had to write about it, she had the experiences there.
Yeah, there's different types of knowledge. The kind of most direct type of knowledge is through identity, like you say, but there are these rough translations that, descending through the different layers of mind, become more and more approximate or more and more distorted. Shall we continue?
A boundless knowledge, greater than men thought, a happiness too high for heart and sense, locked in the world and yearning for release, she felt in her. Waiting as yet for form, it asked for objects around which to grow and nature strong to bear without recoil the splendor of her native royalty, her greatness and her sweetness and her bliss, her might to possess and her vast power to love. Earth made a stepping stone to conquer heaven. The soul saw beyond heaven's limiting boundaries, met a great light from the unknowable, and dreamed of a transcendent action sphere. Aware of the universal self in all, she turned to living hearts and human forms, her soul's reflections, complements, counterparts, the close outlying portions of her being, divided from her by walls of body and mind, yet to her spirit, bound by ties divine.
Thank you. Let's pause. Sri Aurobindo turns to a description of Savitri. The beginning lines are quite profound in a way. He says, a boundless knowledge greater than man's thought, a happiness too high for heart and sense, locked in the world and yearning for release. So he's saying that these things, this boundless knowledge and this happiness, are locked in the world. The world contains them, and they're yearning from release in the forms of the earth, of matter. And she felt these things within her own being, seeking a form of expression, finding objects around by which they could grow, and other natures that could understand and bear these greater truths and this higher happiness. The splendor of her native royalty, her greatness and her sweetness and her bliss, her might to possess and her vast power to love. So these things are finding expression within her and seeking for other beings around her to reflect, to also share in this knowledge, in this joy that she feels within her, this sweetness and bliss, this power of love. We have to search? Oh, research. Hmm. Yeah, we do this research to find this deeper knowledge that's buried within things. But she is experiencing this great knowledge and delight and sweetness and bliss within herself. And she feels her unity with the universal self around her. She feels her unity with the beings around her. And yet they do not recognize, they cannot really share in that experience of oneness and love that she has for others. For them, or for her, the others are her soul's reflections, complements, counterparts, the close outlying portions of her being, divided from her by walls of body and mind, yet to her spirit bound by ties divine. And we can take it as a model, I guess, of the reality, how it is for all of us, too. That we are also one with the beings around us and are bound by them with these ties of the spirit. Only they seem divided by the walls of body and mind. But in the spirit, we're all one. The same self. So let's continue.
Overcoming invisible hedge and masked defense and the loneliness that separates soul from soul, she wished to make all one immense embrace, that she might house in it all living things, raised into a splendid point of seeing light, out of division's dense inconscient cleft, and make them one with God and world and her. Only a few responded to her call. Still fewer felt the screened divinity, and strove to mate its Godhead with their own, approaching with some kinship to her heights. Uplifted towards luminous secrecies, or conscious of some splendor hidden above, they leaped to find her in a moment's flash, glimpsing a light in a celestial vast, but could not keep the vision and the power, and fell back to life's dull, ordinary tone.
Thank you. So Savitri, sensing this inner unity with the beings around her, tries to cross these hedges of mind and body that separate her or separate soul from soul. She wanted to gather all around her into one immense embrace, that she might house in it all living things, raised into a splendid point of seeing light, out of division's dense inconscient cleft that split division between beings, and make them one with God and world and her. She senses that unity of all around with her and with God, and she wants to include others in that. But only a few responded to her call, and still fewer felt the screen divinity and strove to mate its Godhead with their own. Sri Aurobindo begins turning partly to the story in which Savitri has to seek for her mate, that she finds no one in her circle equal to her or willing to approach her or really understand the divinity and the greatness that she is. And therefore she will have to go out and seek her mate in the world. This gathering together the story is set in the distant past, in the Vedic times, before mind has, or the intellect has really crystallized. But nevertheless, he's also alluding continually to things in the present. You know, these are also symbolic. It's not only a legend, it's a symbol also of things that are happening now. So it may be, like B says, that it's representing some kind of development that's occurring now, that there is this uniting of all beings within Mother's embrace, an attempt at that even now in Auroville. And then in the pages that will follow, Sri Aurobindo is going to describe how different people respond in different ways to her light and greatness, and how some try to catch hold, or some try to take that light and greatness for themselves. Others are turned away, they cannot bear that light and greatness. And others just kind of stumble along and try to follow the best they can. So he'll describe these different ways that mankind responds to the divine. But I also wanted to suggest that I think that Sri Aurobindo uses here, in some sense of his description, the kinds of responses that the mother and he also had with the disciples. Yeah, in the ashram, like people also had to struggle and to deal with that light and divinity that they were. And for some it was too much, and for some they couldn't understand, but yet they just kind of grasped at a superficial aspect that they represented. So those, I think, kinds of relations that they had with the disciples are also expressed here in some way. And those disciples are also us disciples. It's no different now. So he's saying, now it's more exciting. Exciting and disastrous at the same time. Okay, let's continue.
A mind-daring heavenly experiment, growing towards some largeness they felt near, testing the unknowns bound with eager touch. They still were prisoned by their human grain. They could not keep up with her tireless step, too small and eager for her large-paced will, too narrow to look with the unborn infinite's gaze. Their nature very grew of things too great, for even the close partners of her thoughts, who could have walked the nearest to her ray, worshipped the power and light they felt in her, but could not match the measure of her soul. A friend and yet too great wholly to know, she walked in their front towards a greater light, their leader and queen over their hearts and souls, one close to their bosoms, yet divine and far.
Thank you. Let's pause. So this is one human response to the divine, to the incarnate divine, and perhaps the most characteristic response. A mind, daring, heavenly experiment, growing towards some largeness they felt in her, testing the unknown's bound with eager touch. Still they were prisoned by their human grain. They could not keep up with her tireless step, too small and eager for her large-paced will, too narrow to look with the unborn infinite's gaze. Their nature weary grew of things too great. We're very much seized by the fascination and interest and splendor of the divinity, but yet to follow that, to become that, to become pure and full of light like her is another story. It's very difficult. And even those who were closest to her, the close partners of her thought, of her thoughts, who could have walked the nearest to her ray, worshipped the power and light they felt in her, but could not match the measure of her soul. So this is perhaps a deeper response. They look up to her and worship her, but as if someone very high and great, far above them. A friend, and yet a friend that's too great wholly to know. She walked in their front towards a greater light, their leader and queen over their hearts and souls, one close to their bosoms, yet divine and far. Let's continue.
Admiring and amazed, they saw her stride, attempting with a godlike rush and leap, heights for their human stature too remote, or with a slow, great, many-sided toil, pushing towards aims they hardly could conceive, yet forced to be the satellites of her sun. They moved unable to forego her light. Desiring, they clutched at her with outstretched hands, or followed, stumbling in the paths she made, or longing with their self of life and flesh. They clung to her for heart's nourishment and support. The rest they could not see in visible light. Vaguely they bore her inner mightiness, or bound by the senses and the longing heart, adoring with a turbid human love. They could not grasp the mighty spirit she was, or change by closeness to be even as she. Some felt her with their souls and thrilled with her. A greatness felt near, yet beyond mind's grasp. To see her was a summons to adore. To be near her drew a high communion's force.
Thank you. Let's pause. So here are others that we can imagine in the ashram around the mother, admiring and amazed, watching the mother move to these greater heights, her swift pace, daring adventures of consciousness. Attempting with a godlike rush and leap heights for their human stature too remote. So they strive, or with a slow, great, many-sided toil, pushing towards aims they could hardly conceive. So they and we strive to follow the best we can, not even clearly understanding where we're going, what we're striving for, but just following in her wake as best we can conceive, best we can follow. Forced to be the satellites of her sun, attracted by her great light, moving around it, but never touching, but unable to leave. Clutching at her with outstretched hands, or followed, stumbling in the paths she made. And some more responding at the physical level, perhaps unable to respond in a deeper soul-like way or mental way. Longing with their self of life and flesh. They clung to her for heart's nourishment and support. The rest they could not see in visible light. In the light of the physical day, they could not see that greater spiritual light that she was. But they felt her physical, emotional support and responded to that. The mother of the ashram was also like a physical mother to the disciples and the children that were there. Those living in her ambience looked up to her as almost a physical mother, and she responded in that way to them as well, dealt with them at that level, took care of their physical needs, looked in on them to see how they were coping and faring in their physical lives, tending to them when they were ill or struggling with problems. She responded also at that level, and some responded to her only at that level. They could not sense that greater, deeper spiritual oneness with her. They could not grasp the mighty spirit she was, or change by closeness to be even as she. But then he describes some felt her with their souls, and thrilled with her. A greatness felt near, yet beyond mind's grasp. To see her was a summons to adore. They instinctively adored her, felt this deep devotion to her. To be near her drew a high communion's force. It drew them into that oneness with her by her force. So let's continue.
To be near her drew a high communion force, so men worship a God too greater to know, too high, too vast to wear a limiting shape. They feel a presence and obey might, adore a love whose rapture invades their breast, to a divine adore, quickening the heartbeats, a law they follow, greatening heart and life, open to the breath in a new diviner air, open to the man is a freer, happier world. He sees high step climbing to self and light, her divine parts, the soul, allegiance called. It saw, it felt, it knew the deity. Her will was prescience on their rapturous act. Her heart, excitable sweetness lured their hearts. A being they loved whose bounds exceeded their. Her mature they could not reach, but bore her touch, answering with the flowers, answering to the sun. They gave themselves to her and asked no more.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not that the physical response is wrong, I think is what you're saying. It's that the physical also wants to participate and respond to the divine and to enter into a kind of unity with the divine. It also feels that deep within, instinctively, that it is one with the divine. So it also longs to hold and to touch the divine. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, we speak of these things as different, mind or emotional or physical, but those are just different vibrations maybe of the same energy, different frequencies of that brings the integrality of the union with the divine. Mm. Mm. Yeah, even the worshiping and divinity as if it's something else is not correct, or it's not the deeper truth. Here, Sri Aurobindo is describing this deeper soul response of the being to the divine. Perhaps leading with a love and adoration, which at the same time greatens the heart and the life. That deeper soul response of love and adoration brings along with it the emotions and the life parts, the vital energies, all become part of that movement of love and adoration. And then that movement carries the being upwards, higher. Open to man is a freer, happier world. He sees high steps climbing to self and light. So all of the being ascends, leading with that love and adoration, participates in that ascent towards the divine. And her divine parts were calling the soul's allegiance, calling the soul to follow, to unite. It saw, it felt, it knew the deity. The soul within us feels its unity with the divine. And that's why it's called most directly. And her will worked on their nature, working to transform their nature, to incorporate its energies into hers. So her they loved, whose bounds exceeded theirs. Her measure they could not reach, but bore her touch. They felt her influence, her power in them, answering with the soul, with the flower's answer to the sun. That's the image of the direct response of nature to the light of the divine. It just turns towards it spontaneously, without thought, without calculation. Right. They gave themselves to her and asked no more. That's the soul's response to the divine. Not to ask for anything for oneself, even greater light or understanding or peace or contentment, but to give, offer oneself fully. That self-giving is the soul's way. Yeah, she had this way of that she developed of exchanging these flowers, which represented, in a way, nature's turning to the divine in different particular ways. We were talking earlier about different forms of culture, which were our expressions of the divine. But Mother kind of created this new art form, in a way, of language of flowers, representing all different aspects of the divine and of the creation. And that exchange that she had was a meaningful interchange of these energies with the disciples. Mm. Mm. Yeah, like he says, they spontaneously answer to the sun without this intermediary of the mind which complicates and divides things. And I think maybe we stop there for today.
She walked in their front towards a greater light, their leader and queen over their hearts and souls, one close to their bosoms, yet divine and far.